You're skeptical of the state. You're getting over the myth of authority. But the state is still formidable. Or is it? You've got a front row seat in the transition to a free society. Let's dive headfirst into The White Pill Box with your host, Mark Maresca.
Greetings all. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today, I'm going to cover a few random topics, one of which is going to be viewer questions that I've been getting ever since our live stream and since then. And it's time I answered some of those, so I'm going to use this episode to do that. But I wanted to cover just a few interesting tidbits first. First, you may notice that I've done a little bit of rebranding. So our video intro on YouTube and our video outro, which you'll see at the end of this, have changed just a little bit. I've tightened them up, I've shortened them, and the dialogue has also been compressed a little bit because the original one I was using from the Substack podcast was, I believe, about 2 minutes long. And after a little bit of feedback, and my own thoughts, I was realizing that it was a little bit long for an intro. Same for the outro. So you'll see some changes there. And also, I've sort of changed the title now of the series. Instead of From the White Pill Box, I'm now calling it just The White Pill Box. I got some feedback also from some folks who have a lot more experience than me, and the from the beginning of that really was unnecessary. So that's changed. So I thought you guys would get a kick out of the new intro and being the first to see it. The other thing I wanted to talk about was I've gotten a couple of viewer questions about the artwork in my office here. I do like art. I'm not an art expert, but I know, I'm like most of you, I know what I like when I see it. That particular painting is from, we got it on a cruise, my wife and I, on our first anniversary. It was about a year after we got married. We took a cruise, and as those of you who've taken cruises before know, there's always typically an art gallery where they sell paintings. This is a stereolithograph of a painting by, and I'm going to actually share it with you. Let me see if I can do that without messing up. Let me share a screen. Here we go. And there we go. A painting by Marcus Glenn is his name. And it's called Jazz Out of This World. It is a stereolithograph, which means it's not an original. They'll typically make limited editions of these. And you can look up stereolithograph. It's a very interesting process of reproducing an original painting. But I just love the vibrant colors here. And it's hanging, as you can see, proudly in my office. Since we're on the topic of art, I have another painting, and I'm going to share that with you as well. And the story behind this is so rich that I'm not going to go into much detail now, but I will link. Here we go. This is the painting itself. This is a painting of an actual physical sculpture that is housed in a museum in Rome, Italy. And again, the story is rich and complex, but the bottom line is Stefan Kinsella had this painting commissioned to be a painting of the original, which he loves, and I love this painting as well. And as it turns out, I received it as a gift from Stefan only a month or so ago, and this was really an exciting thing for me, and it is proudly hanging in our foyer. And it's just beautiful, and everything it evokes, I just love it. And thank you to Stefan. I will link the story of this painting. I will link also the Facebook page of John Wax, who is the actual painter who painted the sculpture. Now, he actually didn't paint it from the sculpture. He actually painted it from a high-quality photograph that Stefan Kinsella had done of the actual sculpture. But it's just beautiful, and I thought I would share that with you. Anyway, getting to the meat of the topic today. Several of our viewers have been asking about the Myth of Authority series. And in particular, some of these questions are around the critical thinking that I've used to try to reason out the insights from the series. Now, this leads to an interesting topic itself, which is how the series came to be itself. It's a 23 episode series. It's about anywhere from 25 to 45 minutes per episode. So there's a lot of meat there. But the way it evolved was not that way. It was not intended to be a long series. When I first got the idea of sharing my thoughts about the myth of authority, I really had one main intention in mind. And that was to see if I could help steer libertarian thinkers who focus on the state and get them to kind of shift focus onto the myth of authority. Why? Because the myth of authority is the root cause of the state. They and myself, during all the years I've been an anarchist, a voluntarist, really focused on the state because when you get red-pilled, you realize the state is a bad thing and you want it to go away and you figure that's the problem. So you tell everyone that's the problem. That's not wrong. It's like telling someone that cancer is a bad problem. But if you can identify the root of your problem, and in this case we have done that, the myth of authority is the root of the state, then one would think that it might be more efficient to address the problem by addressing the root. And I didn't see libertarians doing this, even though many of the people in our camp understood that the myth of authority is the root of the problem. So I was trying to help them internalize that by directing their focus onto the myth. And to do that, I figured a good way was to break down the myth of authority as best I could and explain it in sufficient detail that itself might help other libertarians realize just how critically important it is, and thereby they might shift their focus. That was the intent. Then, as I was putting each episode together and delivering it, and I would take notes on what else I wanted to talk about, I would be looking at my notes, organizing my notes, and then realizing that, okay, this particular subtopic of the subject really needs its own episode. So the episode started to snowball from there. So what I originally had really envisioned as just maybe a 3 or 4 episode series ended up being 23 episodes. It was about halfway through that process that it started to dawn on me that the myth of authority yielded so many more insights that this wasn't really about anymore just trying to get other libertarian messengers to focus on the myth. But I realized that the insights themselves were very, very impactful. And at that point, it was more like I really had to flesh that out too. So I fleshed more and more out. I did more episodes until we finished off at about 23. Now, to me, it was good I did it that way, because I could have done it a different way. I could have said, I'm not going to publish anything or put anything out there until I have thought it through front to back, and then maybe put a book out. Well, I don't do this as a full-time job. So that could have taken many months, maybe even a year or two. And then during that time, nobody would get any content from me. So I did opt to do it simply as a series. And I'm glad it worked out that way, because you do get to see my thinking along the way. You get to see how it evolved. And I like it that way. I'm glad I did it. But it did end up changing the direction of where we were headed. So that now really, for me, it's less about, I still think that the libertarian messengers should focus more on the myth. But now the questions are, based on these insights, how important is messaging at all? And I think it would help the libertarian community to really internalize these insights, because they are new. I think of it a little bit like an analogy of human beings out in the mountains and the hills, and every once in a while we'll step on a pebble and say, oh, what's this? They look under their foot and they find a gold nugget. And in this case, this is a metaphor for, in this case, our red pill moment, the realization that the state is illegitimate. And that's a great thing. It has value. And then the libertarians, myself included, left the hills. We left the mountains, and we tried to share our valuable insight, this gold, with everyone else and say, look, this is a wonderful thing here. The idea that the state is illegitimate, I want you to see it too, so that we can kind of spread the word. A few, very few thinkers, messengers in our movement kind of stuck around the hills and the mountains and walked around a little bit more, and a couple of them actually stepped on another nugget, and they looked under their foot and they picked up a bigger nugget, and that one is like a bigger nugget of gold. Looky here, another piece of gold. What's this? The metaphor for that is the insight that the myth of authority is indeed the root cause of the state. Now, that's big. That's important to know. And once again, those few who thought of that left and tried telling everyone yet again, in this case, the libertarians, that the myth of authority is the root of the state. So that first nugget you found, that the state is illegitimate, that's valuable, no doubt. But this bigger one is kind of more impactful because it gets us to the root of the state. So metaphorically, my journey through this series has sort of kept me in the hills and in the mountains, where I more or less ended up saying, gee, if we found 2 really great gold nuggets here, gee, I wonder if there might be more. And sure enough, there's more insights that kind of emerge out of this vein of gold, so to speak. And those are the ones that I think I'm trying to communicate to the community at large. If nothing else, to share it, but also to let others ponder it and think about it. Because if I'm not the first to have uncovered these insights, then at least they're not popularly known. I've never seen them mentioned before. Insights such as the state is much, 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 much smaller than we think. It's much, much weaker than we think. The bullies of the state, meaning the politicians and the law enforcement types, are actually going to play a part in the transition to free society. The insight that we are already in the transition. That's not something that's waiting for us in the future. We're in it now, or at the very beginning, baby steps of it, but we're in it now. So it's these kinds of insights that I want to see out there and more fleshed out. Anyway, part of the feedback I've gotten from our viewers is that they get all the initial steps. They have the first nugget. They might even have that second nugget. And they have given me feedback that I might spend a little too much time on those. They kind of got it already, so speed it along. And I've had some suggestions that I consolidate. That's a great one. That's a really, really good suggestion. Episode 21, I believe it is, I'll link to it, was my summary of the white pills of the series. And that's as close as I did come to consolidating the entire series. But it could use an even better consolidation, I think. So just so you know, I am working on a couple of ideas to do that, to sort of just say, okay, here's the long and short of it. Now, the problem with that is that when you just hand the long and short of it to a person, even to existing libertarians and voluntarists, they're going to find a hard time accepting it out of the gate. Why? Because these are red pill type insights. This is a little bit like telling a blue pill person, hey, the state is illegitimate. You shouldn't believe that the state is legitimate. We would be much better off as a society with no government at all. How about that for a long and short of it? Well, most blue pill people are not going to take that very well. So I have a little bit of concern that some of my insights are a little bit like that to the libertarian community. So if I do have a short, concise package where I present this, they're going to see these insights one after another, each of which could be a little bit controversial, and they might tend to dismiss it out of hand just because it's too radically different than what they've been used to thinking. So there's a bit of a risk of that, but I'm going to come up with a way to do it in such a way that I try to sort of get around that concern. We'll see. The other thing I want to really emphasize is that I've been using my insights. They're not really my innovations. I've stumbled on those gold nuggets out in the mountains just like everyone else. I didn't invent these. These are just insights that arise out of the reasoning and logic and real world evidence of human nature and the existing conditions we have. So I think I've only really just happened to have stumbled on these, and I do need others to think about them, look at them, beat them up. So I wanted to make that clear. Now, the thread among several of the questions that I've gotten from viewers has been critical thinking. How do you think through these things? How do you think through logical thoughts in general? What's your method? That's a good question, and I think that deserves a good answer. So let me devote the rest of this episode to how I do it. For me, it's largely a habit, but it takes, there's probably several key components to this. So I'll start with what I consider to be the most important aspect of critical thinking, and that is starting off any question with "I don't know," the phrase "I don't know." And why is that? Well, because it preps us immediately for being open and humble about our knowledge about something that we actually don't know anything about yet, or don't know much about yet, or even haven't pondered much yet. Now, those things that we do know, we can say, I know. I know my name. I know I'm a human being. I know my age. So we're not talking about things like that. But when we're talking about different ideas or political ideas or social ideas or your opinion about some current event, I'll generally start off with, okay, I don't know, or I don't know everything about that. So I have to be careful about rendering a judgment about it. And I don't know what typically mean. I'm not prepared to give you a definitive, unequivocal answer on that. Again, unless I have thought it through or I am familiar with it. So if we take just for the obvious example of, do you think that an anarchist order is superior to an order with a state? I would say, yes, I do think that's the case. Do I know it? Well, I don't know for sure, but I am really, really highly convinced of it. Why? Because I've taken the time to think that particular issue through. Now, let's say I was a blue-pilled person, me, but I'm blue-pilled. I don't understand voluntarism or anarchism or any of that yet. And you ask me, do you think a stateless society is superior to a society with a state? I would hope my answer would be, well, I don't know for sure, but I don't think so, based on just my impression. So that's sort of a starting point, but you go beyond that now. Okay, so my thinking beyond that is, well, the next step would be, well, is whatever it is we're talking about possible? So we start with I don't know, and the next question might be, is it possible? Now, possible, I try to use this term pretty rigorously. When I say possible, I mean, is it physically possible in the real world? And really the standard for that question really would be, does it violate the laws of nature or of logic or reason, or doesn't it? So is it possible that, I don't know, I will own a Lexus next year? Is that possible? Well, that doesn't violate the laws of nature. It is, there's nothing illogical about it. There's nothing that violates, causal laws or laws of nature. So yes, it's possible. Now, another example might be, well, can you have a square circle? Can you have a shape that's a square and a circle at the same time? A shape that has exactly 4 equal right-angled corners and equal length of sides, but it's also a circular object. Well, no, I know I could say that's not possible. Why? Because that violates the very definitions of those two shapes. So the definitions conflict if you try to mash them into one object in the real world. So no, that's not possible. And now we could take that step back to the first question. I know there's no such thing as a square circle. I don't have to worry about not having looked everywhere in the universe. I know that nowhere in the universe we know is there a square circle anywhere. So that's the concept of possible. And that's an important step because that sweeps away anything that's impossible and only leaves you what's physically possible. But still, what's physically possible opens up enormous possibilities. And it's at this step that now the next level would be introduced, which would be, for me, plausible. Is the thing plausible? Is the concept, or whatever it is we're discussing, plausible? And now we've gone really from what you might consider objective evaluations, like what's possible, and moved on to more subjective judgments. Why are they subjective? Well, it's because we need experience, we need data, we need more than just our logical reasoning skills. We need to now ask the question if it's plausible, but to do that, we have to know something. So if you know very little about a particular issue, it's difficult to know if it's plausible or not because you don't have the elements to weigh the various factors involved. If you do know, then you can render a judgment. And even then, it's subject to you learning more, discovering more, others discovering more data, honing your logical skills better. So getting back to the example question of is a free society superior to a society with a state, to me the answer is yes. It's plausible, quite plausible, that it is superior. What's that based on? It's based on my experience with the real world, with my knowledge of economics, to the extent that I've done those things and studied them, and so on. To me, they're plausible. Now, more evidence could come in at a later time. And if it's highly persuasive evidence, it could change my mind. So I have to be open to that. We always have to be open to more data coming in. But the more likely it is that your judgment of plausibility makes sense, the more you're going to stick with that judgment and alter it as needed. And then the last segment of this line of thinking would be, is it likely? So plausibility and likelihood are similar, but likely now gets us down to a real judgment as to whether you think it will happen or not. So will let's say the government's talking about some kind of tax cut bill, and it's being proposed right now, and you're asking, do you think it's going to pass? Well, I don't know. Is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. It doesn't violate the laws of nature. Is it plausible? Well, actually, at the current moment, it's plausible because we can imagine it happening based on the fact that I believe there's a bill that got proposed right now or recently in the Congress by Donald Trump, and I think it includes some kind of tax cuts. I'm not even sure about that, by the way. I don't generally follow these too closely, but I believe that's in there. Is it plausible? Well, the little I know about politics right now, I believe Trump and his party are dominant in the Congress and so on. And when I think about that, it's like, well, he's popular more or less with them. They're the majority. It's plausible that they do pass this. That's the best judgment I can make about that. Then you ask, is it likely? Okay, I can't answer that. And the reason I can't answer that is I don't know enough about it beyond what I just explained. So I'm willing to kind of be humble at that point and say, is it likely? I don't know. I really don't know. So that's sort of an example of how I think through things like this. First, always be willing to say, I don't know. Then ask if it's possible. And then ask plausible, and then likely. And we don't have to commit to any of those, except perhaps the first one, I don't know. You may not even know if something is possible. You may not have enough to know if it's plausible, and you very often don't have enough to know if something is likely. So those are more or less the threads that I go through when I'm pondering something. And this was true as I thought through the myth of authority insights. For example, when it occurred to me that the bullies of the state actually are responding to the environment that they're in. When I thought about that, something in my mind was making me realize, okay, wait a minute now, they're playing a role. They're actors in this equation of population and the state. They're human actors. As I thought it through, I realized, gee, that the state isn't really just this fixed entity that never changes. And that led me to realize, well, gee, me and most libertarians, voluntarists seem to have sort of fallen into a bit of a trap here all these decades. We hate the state. We think of the state as this monstrosity. And we've almost layered into this a movie or Hollywood action film concept, where in an action film, you pretty much always know these are the good guys we're rooting for. These are the bad guys who are the threat. And also there's commonly in these movies the majority who are just kind of there, passive, clueless. So it's the heroes, it's the villains, and it's everyone else. That's sort of the Hollywood picture of this, right? In Star Wars, there's the Rebel Alliance, right? And as many as there weren't a lot of them because, they're the minority rebels. There's the majority of all the people in the galaxy who are just presumed to be there. And then there's the Empire, the villains, and that's it. Those are your three. And who are battling? Well, it's the rebels and the villains, right? Those are the two parties who are battling. The majority, we're just sort of, they're background, right? They're just the curtains behind the stage or furniture. And then the villains, what are the villains? Well, they're always there. They're fixed, they're static, they're powerful, and they're never anything other than that until this climactic battle where they're gone. It's a pretty black and white picture of the villains. Now the rebels, they're the ones who are adapting. They're changing. That's where the drama is happening typically. It seems our camp has sort of grafted us into this Hollywood picture. So who are the heroes? Well, it's us. It's the libertarians and voluntarists. We're not going to see a free society unless we do the work, until we engage in the battle. And who are we going to battle? Well, the villains. And who are the villains? Well, that's the state. And of course, the state is this fixed, static thing. We don't think of them as human beings that really act. Yeah, they might be portrayed with sort of some humanity in there, and one of them might be sort of a bit of a rebel himself. That's about as far as it gets into nuance in our villain picture. And that's sort of the state too. We think of the state as just this fixed entity. It's always as strong as it will ever be until the day we, the heroes, come in and defeat it. How? Well, they don't seem to have much to say about the actual process about how that will happen or how that imagined battle will take place. And all along this, you have the majority in the background who are basically doing nothing. They're passive. So they're passively going along with statism. And in terms of how they will be when we have this free society, when we, the heroes, defeat the villains, the state, and we have a new order, a voluntarist free society order, where's the majority in this equation? They're still there. They're still passive. So I think that's a big mistake that the libertarians have made, including myself, again, until I realized these insights, when it occurred to me that, no, it's not quite like that. My critical thinking skills led me to realize that, okay, the villains, the state, are comprised of human beings, and they are, like all of us, responding to the incentives at hand in the conditions or the environment they find themselves in. They're no different than that, and that's all they're doing. Even the psychopaths, which hopefully are few in number, but even they are responding to the conditions at hand. They're doing everything they can to keep and gain the power and increase the power that they have. That's them being humans in whatever way humanity expresses itself in them. But collectively, they're not a fixed, static entity. They're just this moving blob of people, moving in the sense that they are evolving, shifting, thinking, acting. They're doing what humans do based on their incentives and the incentives they find themselves in the environment at hand. And what about us? Well, it turns out we're not the heroes in this. We're not. The 50 years of experience in libertarian activism, I think, is pretty well established that the libertarians don't have a real role here. Now, I'll emphasize once again, their scholarly role, their analytical role in understanding the principles, that is critical. It was and is important that the principles are established, understood, clear, and documented in scholarly work like economics works, legal theory, property theory. That's critical. And libertarians have been doing this for half a century, even more, but it really got kicked off in the 70s. And they continue to do this, and it's very important. I'll never discount that. That's critical. But I'm talking about the activism, the outreach, the messaging. Now, I'm thankful that there were messengers because that's how I got to be a voluntarist, and I'm glad about that. And that's one of the reasons I keep doing it, because there could be maybe just a few people who are turned around and woken up out of the fog of the myth of authority because of what I say or through some tangential ripple effect of something I say. That makes it worth doing it. But that's a local, sort of narrow, positive result I could see coming out of it, and I'm willing to put in the effort to achieve that. But I'm not kidding myself into thinking that what I'm doing or what most of us are doing are actually going to be part of what contributes to a free society or the evolution of a free society. Now, is it possible? We'll go back to that. Do I know that our efforts as messengers is not really going to affect the end result? No, I don't know that. It's possible, because that's the second step. Is it possible? Yes, it's possible. It's conceivable. It doesn't violate the laws of nature. Is it plausible? No, I don't think it's plausible based on what I think about and understand about this transition and this entire psychological dynamic. Why do I think it's not plausible? Because it's not plausible that any of our messaging triggers a cascade of events that leads to some messenger or group of messengers or message type that so permeates through the culture that it rapidly moves people in the direction of serious skepticism of the state. That just seems implausible. Now, but again, is that physically possible? Yeah, you can imagine it happening. It wouldn't violate a law of nature if something like that happened. And that increased skepticism could push things along significantly in the transition. So we can imagine it happening, but is it likely it'll happen? I don't think so. But again, for me personally, that's not a reason not to message, because that's not really what I'm expecting to happen. I'm not counting on that thread of possibility. I'm more counting on the idea that maybe a couple of people down the line will eventually get truly skeptical of the state because of my efforts or the ripple effects of my efforts. And that's enough for me. And so to be clear and tie it back to what I was saying, it's for that reason that I don't see the heroes in this story as we, the voluntarists. The villains, you could say, is the state, for sure. The bullies in particular of the state. But they are not a static entity. They are also shifting in their psychology with the conditions that change as the years and decades pass. The real player is the majority on the other side. That would be the majority. But they're not playing a conscious role. I know that's boring because that would not happen in the movies. But this is about psychology and the dynamics of the psychology of the myth. The majority have this myth. But now, in these last decades and in particular, only in the last 5-10 years, the level of skepticism for the state has really ramped up. And that's because of technology and the decentralization of information flow. I'll get more into this probably in some interviews I'm trying to line up shortly. But that is the long and short of it in terms of the majority. Their level of skepticism is starting to increase. That's the myth of authority in the process of a slow erosion. And it's the myth of authority that establishes the environment at any given point. Typically, through all of history, the myth of authority was so powerful that it established this ubiquitous, all-encompassing, welcoming, hospitable environment for the bully types that are out there. It's now, right now, in particular the last decade, but really kicked off when the whole libertarian scholarly work started, to spread out and trigger more skepticism. Baby steps for sure, even today, but more than before. And that is an erosion of the myth of authority. In doing that, you have the growing skepticism. If that's our new environment, then this is an environment that the bullies are presented with. Does it reflect itself in their actions? Not too much yet, no, but to some degree, and that was covered in one of our episodes. You simply take that trend and continue it along. Now, is it valid to continue the trend? Well, I don't know. Let's think about that. Because if we're on a trend now, what if that's just a temporary trend? Is that possible? Sure, it's possible. Doesn't violate the laws of nature. Is it plausible? No. It's more plausible that the trend continues. And I detailed that out in yet another one of the episodes. The various conditions that we're seeing and real world evidence, the progress of technology, the generational factor of there being a younger generation, a middle generation, a middle-aged generation, an older generation, each with a different level and experience with the myth of authority, is one of the psychological factors that tends to support that the trend toward more skepticism, greater decentralization will continue. That's a good thing for the erosion of the myth. That's a bad thing for the bullies. How will they respond as those trends continue? Well, you have a increasingly less favorable environment for the bullies. And that leads to one of those insights that I mentioned. The insight that if they're in an environment where they are a little bit less welcomed than they were in our traditional image of a ubiquitous myth of authority world, if it's a little more skeptical, which means the environment is less hospitable to them, those are factors in their mind that are weighed when they're making life choices. And they're going to proportionally make life choices that disfavor an entry into politics or law enforcement. It's logical to conclude that. I don't see how they would be more incentivized to go into these fields if it's a less welcoming environment as the decades pass. And of course, I simply took that trend and continued it on. If the myth of authority continues to erode and the environment is that much less welcoming, the bullies will be, the potential bullies, I should say, will be less likely to enter into the field. It's a fairly simple insight, and I worry a little bit that those who hear it find it too simple because perhaps they've bought into this more Hollywood type of drama where they expect the spread of our ideas to eventually manifest itself in some more dramatic way. But even there, they're thinking, as I said before, that the state is this static thing. It's not evolving or changing with the environment as it changes. No, it's a fixed threat that's always there. It is easy to think of that today because we're so early in this transition. But as it moves along, they must change. And that will make it less attractive as a job to pursue. Not to mention what will be available in the private market. If the private employment market increases as technology and productivity increases, well, they will have other options. Now, is that just speculation? No, it's plausible because that's exactly what's happening today. The recruitment for military, the recruitment for police is considerably down. It's on a downward trend. It does blip up now and then. It recovers, but it never recovers to what it was. So these are all reasons that I think the trends will continue. And that really ties back to what I was saying. That's why, to me, it's plausible that we're in the transition to a free society. We're on the right road, and it's plausible that the trends will continue. So that's sort of a overview of how I think through these things, how I think through other issues in life. I try to apply that same general standard. I generally start with, I don't know. If I don't in fact know, is it possible? Does it not violate the laws of nature? Is it plausible? That's where we're getting a little more subjective based on the knowledge I have about the situation or the little knowledge I have. And is it likely? And plausible and likely are some things I am perfectly willing to say, I can't render a judgment on that right now. I can't because I don't know enough about it. Or if I feel I know enough about it, I can render a tentative judgment on plausibility or likelihood. So that's about it. I think that's what I wanted to cover based on several of the feedback notes I got from viewers. I'd like you all to keep those coming. I am interested in all of them. I love getting them. And we'll cover some of this further, but I'll also take some time soon to get to some of the more detailed questions that I've got. But I think that'll wrap things up for today. So take care and see you next time.
Thanks so much to all subscribers and everyone who joined today. And remember, keep looking for those white pills.